Hello everybody, it's JJ Talks, and it is Saturday on the Breakfast Club, and today I wanted to talk about the fallacy of the vacuum, I'm going to call this concept. So again, I know I'm going to be beating a dead horse by saying this, but I'm going to be bringing up some hot topics in this video, and I want to reiterate that I don't want to necessarily focus on the topics per se, though they are relevant, obviously. But I want to focus on the idea of talking about these subjects. So, like last summer on Twitter, someone said to me that statistics speak for themselves. And I was like, wow, that's like not true at all. So, the conversations more specifically was about crime rates in the black community. And this person said that because the FBI's study, the statistics establish that in whatever year black Americans had been convicted of a certain number of crimes, then that must mean black people have a culture of violence. So he extrapolated from black Americans are convicted of a certain type of crime more frequently as black people have a culture of violence. So I just thought it was absolutely fascinating to me that he sat there and he said to me that statistics speak for themselves. And he almost like he basically said that the statistical study is saying that black people have a culture of violence. Like, and which is it was funny to me that it was lost on him that he took several steps to get to that conclusion, and that in his mind that was the only logical conclusion, and that the study basically said that. And when I said statistics don't speak for themselves, that's why we have statisticians. Like, that's why people study statistics for a long time. That's why we have, the idea of statistical significance, why we have to calculate that in confidence, percentages. Because numbers don't speak for themselves, they don't exist in a vacuum. We have to speak on behalf of them and interpret them. So, for this specific instance, he took this study that said, in this year, this percentage of African Americans were convicted of this type of crime. Convicted of this type of crime. In this year, that's it. What the study doesn't say is this is the percentage of black Americans who committed this many crimes. So, while he could take the viewpoint of and interpret these numbers to mean that black Americans have a culture of violence, someone else could, like me, could just as equally say, this shows me that black Americans are being disproportionately convicted of crimes. So, being convicted of a crime is not the same thing as being charged with a crime, and it's definitely not the same thing as committing a crime. So there are many people who commit crimes who are never charged or convicted. There are many people who commit crimes are charged but never convicted. There are people who don't commit crimes that are convicted. So, to me, those numbers could say that. Well, to him, those numbers could say this. So, for him to say that that study exists in this vacuum where it's, and of course we see the skeptics and the logical, rational people say this all the time, the numbers are the numbers, there's no humanity behind it, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because the criminal justice system is inherently related to, regulating humanity. So, I think it's important to acknowledge that we draw a lot more from these numbers than we think we do. They don't just, to him, those numbers literally said the black community is more violent and has a culture of violence. Which is wow, you just took giant steps away from what the study actually said. So it's important to recognize that, all of these studies require require interpretation, and require conversation and don't exist in vacuums. And nothing exists in a vacuum. So, for example, this video originally got inspired because I saw Paul talking about gun laws and gun issues and the Second Amendment. So, a lot of Second Amendment supporters will say that we'll use the example of Switzerland. So Switzerland, like 1 in 4 people have a gun. They have a lot of guns in Switzerland, but they're all also trained and qualified to own guns. And it's important to consider that they have universal health care. Their education system is much better than ours. So there's a lot of factors that go into play in constructing a certain type of culture surrounding guns. And even then, proportionally, Switzerland has much less guns than us. So I think it's important to acknowledge, and I don't want to just put this on, right-wingers too, because liberals do it all the time. I've made the mistake of doing it before. There was a study that showed that, like, if you have a gun in your home, you are, 35 times more likely to kill yourself or someone in your house. And someone pointed out to me, well, it's like saying if you drive a car, you're more likely to get into a car accident, right? So I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. So it kind of makes sense that, we all do this thing where we look at a study and we interpret it in our brain and then regurgitate that information as fact. Whereas we're not talking about facts, we are talking about an interpretation of the facts. And it's okay that we are interpreting things in our own ways, but we just have to acknowledge that we're interpreting them and stop having this idea that, the only thing good is empirical, and then trying to take empirical studies and wedge your opinion in them so your opinion comes across as empirical, which it's not. Anyway, I just thought it was something that I wanted to talk about because I think it's important to recognize that we do this thing. Numbers don't speak for themselves. Studies don't speak for themselves. They require knowledgeable, well thought out commentary and interpretation. And people go through years of training to be able to do that in a meaningful way. And nothing just exists in a vacuum by itself. There are influences. Everything influences how we. Everything influences everything, which I know is a very vague statement. So when you look at crime rates in the Black community, for example, you must also look at poverty rates in the Black community and correlation between crime rates and poverty rates. And yeah, there's just everything's interconnected. And so to act like something exists by itself in some little pure bubble is ridiculous. Anyway, I want to hear you guys' thoughts, or if you've ever done this or you've seen someone else do this, because I'd be interested to know. I definitely think it happens a lot, and we should kind of just be a little bit more aware of that. Well, anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.